Joining us right now at the Arctic Oil and Gas Symposium in Calgary is Drue Pearce. And Drue, you are a policy advisor for a law firm that works in both Washington, D.C. and Alaska.
That's correct.
Okay, what is it that you focus on?
I focus on whatever the needs are of our clients, but basically helping strategize for them not only their government relations strategy, but also their permitting strategy for whatever their projects happen to be.
And right now the Arctic seems to be taking on a little bit more prominence when it comes to looking for places to drill for oil and gas.
The Arctic certainly is, and we're seeing a lot more interest both onshore and offshore, but we have a number of smaller independents that are coming to onshore Arctic Alaska, and then of course the big guys are trying to play offshore.
Mm-hmm. You're from Alaska.
I am.
And so how have you seen things change over the years
when
it comes to this industry?
We saw drilling in the Chukchi before the oil prices dropped in the late 80s and early 90s. And it's taken a long time for the companies to come back. It also took a long time for new lease sales to happen. But after the lease sales in the mid-2000s, a number of companies have shown interest in coming back to both the Chukchi and the Beaufort Sea. I think the difference this time is with all the electronic media and the way news travels so quickly, there's more awareness, not just in Alaska, but certainly in the lower 48 and in the environmental community around the world about what's happening and what's proposed in the Arctic. Certainly in Alaska, but elsewhere too. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing a stronger push by the environmental community to have no activity in the Arctic. At the same time, we see climate change becoming such a huge topic.
They want no activity, as you said. Yes, because they just want to try and preserve this area as well. The oil companies, are you noticing a change in them? Because it seems to me as though they're having to pay attention to this criticism that they need to do something to make things safer than, say, the practices might have been back in the 70s and 80s.
You know what happens, what I've seen in Alaska, every major company that comes in to do business in our Arctic offshore sets a new standard for how to do things, particularly in their relationships with the local communities and the local government as well as the state government. But they spend an enormous amount of time in the communities, building confidence, building awareness, and also proving up opportunities for employment that will come from their operations. Shell has done that, ConocoPhillips is doing it, Statoil has a person who does nothing in Alaska but work with the local communities, even though they are a number of years away from any exploration activity.
One of the things that you talked about in your presentation was the advancements in oil spill preparedness and response.
Right.
What do you see in that area? Because that's one of the main concerns, I think, that a lot of people have is because of the harsh conditions up there, that a response may not be done in a timely fashion.
Well, what we see is a lot of research being done at both the private level but also in the public sector, and probably some better prioritization of what sort of research is needed most. And I will tell you that I think most people would agree that research in how to clean up oil in broken ice is probably the most important thing for activities in the Arctic, whether they're oil and gas industry or whether it's the shipping industry or the cruise ship industry that might unfortunately someday have a grounding and a spill.
Mm-hmm. You talked about a polar code. Mm-hmm. What is that?
Well, the International Maritime Organization is developing a polar code which will set out the standards for operating in the Arctic for the marine industry, both in the Arctic and the Antarctic, but we should expect to see those standards be somewhat different for the two poles. We expect, or we hope anyway, that code will be codified by 2015.
Okay, and also, I mean, is this something that would affect, I guess, there's 5 countries that are trying to get their piece of the Arctic right now. And would this code oversee what they might be going after?
Well, it will oversee the activities on the seas and on any lands that those countries are going after. But it actually is a code for the marine industry itself.
Okay. You're from Alaska. Does the possibility of an increase in activity up there, does that excite you, or are you a little bit nervous about it? What do you think?
Well, Alaskans support activities both on and offshore. When it's polled, somewhere between 70 and 80% of Alaskans are very supportive of activities both onshore and offshore in the Arctic. We know that our standards at the state level are the best in the world. We know that we know how to do it right. We've got the cleanest oil fields in the world at Prudhoe Bay, and we want that activity and we want the economic development.
Okay. Comparing Alaska to northern Canada, one of the things that we've been talking about here is the connectedness that the First Nations people have to the land in northern Canada, and that's presenting some challenges and some issues that oil companies are dealing with. Is it the same thing in Alaska?
Well, because of the Native Claims Settlement Act, there is no Indian country or true native lands in Alaska, but you have the North Slope Borough, which is, of course, populated by the Inupiat Eskimo, as well as recognized tribes. So what we see is an effort by the industry to work with the Native Alaskans at all of those levels in each village, both the tribal entity and the state municipality entity, to work toward building to permitting. And the local government has a large say in permitting, and we think that that's a positive way to do business.
Okay. Last thing, we're checking with everybody to find out what their thoughts are about sustainability. And so when you think of the oil industry working up in the Arctic and perhaps expanding, what is your idea of sustainability?
Well, I think sustainability will have two impacts in Alaska. The first is jobs. Now, Prudhoe Bay was first discovered in the 60s. There's been development there, and TAPS started operating in 1977. So, and we hope that there'll be lots more oil discovered onshore. So it's not a short-term, just drop in the pan sort of option. You spend that much money, you continue to explore, and you continue to develop your land. So we want to see that. But perhaps more importantly, because the state of Alaska has a permanent fund and some of the revenues from any oil and gas development go into that fund, that oil and gas is bringing us sustainability for the future, for that day when it comes, the rainy day we call it, when there is no more oil and gas production on state lands or offshore. We will still have that permanent fund. Every dollar in the permanent fund came from the oil and gas production.
Okay. Do you notice a difference, or would you be aware of a difference in the way Canada is handling what's happening in the north compared to the way Alaska and the U.S. is doing it?
Well, I don't think it's so much that it's different, it's that you have a different government structure. That's number one, and you are able to make areas available and have a negotiation with the industry partners in a way that we can't do under our leasing system. But once the company has an area where they're interested, I think under your present laws and under the new standards that the National Energy Board has set, that you will see probably exploration happening more quickly.
In Canada.
So that you don't have as long a time frame between that lease sale and the actual exploration.
Okay, Drue, thank you very much for your time.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.
We've been chatting with Drue Pearce.